destructively interfere. But there's a little bit of catch in quantum mechanics. Here, in quantum mechanics, superposition implies that a quantum state can exist in several distinct states simultaneously. Like, if a state is a superposition of states, it does not mean that it has acquired that final state. It's mean that whatever it is a sum of, so then it exists in all these positions simultaneously. Here, this diagram explains it quite nicely. So this, if this is a particle, if classically it's a superposition or a sum, you can say, of these waves, then but in quantum mechanics it will exist in all these forms simultaneously. So yeah, if you're thinking why are we studying about superposition, wait for a couple of slides, it'll all make sense, I guess. So yeah, this will probably make you remember it better. The great Schrodinger's cat who sacrificed her life so that we could understand quantum mechanics, or did she? Next, another important concept, wave function collapse. So in quantum mechanics, it is when a particle is experimentally measured or detected or identified, is the wave function loses its wavy nature and becomes more localized to acquire a definite state. So it exists in a superposition of many states, and then when you detect it, it collapses in one of those definitive states. So yeah, all of this is elegantly combined to give the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. It took decades of work of many brilliant scientists to come up with this interpretation. So yeah, it puts all these concepts that I just explained, superposition, wave function collapse, in an elegant manner. So you can do 2 plus 2 on your own, I'm sure, but this is how we put it formally. A quantum particle exists in a superposition of all possible quantum states until it is observed or measured through an experiment, after which its wave function collapses to occupy one of the definitive states. So sometimes we intuitively think that all these states might have equal probability, but it may not be the case. So this is an important point. The possible quantum states have a finite probability, may or may not be equal, to be occupied, which we can calculate through various other uh, concepts of quantum physics. Yeah, so we are studying physics. Obviously, we cannot shy away from some math. Mathematically, if a wave function psi is in a linear combination of eigenbases, say phi I, that is, it is in a superposition of all these bases. So I would like to point that out in case you are unfamiliar with those terms, eigenbases, especially for first years. I'd like to say you can think of a basis as with the very fundamental building block of a if you are talking about a three-dimensional space, so x, y, and in terms of these three fundamental elements, you can describe any other point. So for an n-dimensional space, you can have, and you will have an n dimension n elements in your vector space. And so yeah, so if psi x and if psi exists in a Hilbert space, and now talking about Hilbert space, a Hilbert space can be simply put, a Hilbert space is a vector space where this wave functions they are talking about psi exist. So Hilbert space is the space we are concerned at. And this is what it is the relevant information about Hilbert space. As one of my colleagues rightly put the other day, even Hilbert did not know what Hilbert space is. But let's not go there. Yeah. So if we are describing psi as a superposition of all these states, that is a linear combination A1, psi1, A1, phi1, A2, phi2, A3, phi3, etc. So on measurement, when we are measuring it. So psi will collapse in any one of the eigenstates. Needless to say, other components will collapse to zero, and the probability of psi occupying any one of those, like let's say if the probability of psi occupying the eigenstate of phi 2 will be a2 mod of a2 square. Important point, the probability is a real thing. It should be a real number. So here, if a1, a2, a3, all these are complex, its mod of square will definitely be real. You will eventually learn how we get these numbers, but yeah, this is how we put it mathematically, wave function collapse. Any questions here? This might be tricky to some. Okay.
Check that for the questions. One.
Sorry?
You can check chat. There are some questions on the chat.
It's a good point too. What do we mean by states? So, Divyansh, yeah, that's a very good question. So, states is basically how, Chirag has answered it. Yeah, but I'll answer it anyway. The state is how you would, maybe identify is a wrong word, but how you would describe a particle. Like, as I said, classically, there are a number of ways you can describe any object: color, size, position, momentum. But like if you're talking about an electron cloud, so how exactly would you describe it? So a state that, so here the state is a wave function which it stores all the information about the particle. This is how you are identifying it, its properties, it's describing its properties. uh, Collapse happens only during a particular experiment. Yeah, experiment here we mean when you're detecting or observing it. So an experiment can be a number of ways, like the Young's double slit experiment is also one of this. Then the uh, what you're doing, you're detecting a wave, right? So any kind of experiment where detection or observation is happening, so that's when it is collapsing. Is basis and Hilbert space linear algebra terms? Yes. Somvanshi Deva, wave function can collapse to any state or a particular state only. So yeah, this is what is tricky at the heart of quantum mechanics, that we do not know. We cannot say that when a wave function is existing in multiple states, it can collapse to any either of the states. It's impossible to say in which one it will. We can calculate probabilities, but we cannot know for sure in which particular one it will collapse. Like uh, here, if this is in a superposition of all these states, so on measurement, it can collapse to any one of those. And this is what's tricky about it. Yeah, it does depend on the probability. Uh, could you please explain what is Hilbert space? So if you know what a Hilbert space, to put simply, it's a vector space in which all these wave functions that we are talking about, they exist. So this is what's the basic thing about it. I guess you'll understand it better when you take a course on quantum mechanics or linear algebra, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's it, Anuja. You can continue with your presentation.
Sure. This is a meme which puts Copenhagen interpretation nicely. there could be multiple states, but yeah. Now, let's dive into what entanglement is. For that, we'll talk about this interesting thought experiment, the wishing bone. So you might have heard in pop culture about this simple Thanksgiving ritual. Two friends make a wish and they split a wishing bone, and it's assumed that whoever gets the bigger part will have their wish granted. Simple, right? Well, now what if you perform the same experiment and the parts of the wishing bone that you just fragmented, they are quantum particles. Now let's talk about what could be different then. Well, for once, it poses a number of problems. How? Let's get into that. So before the observation, what will happen is we just studied the Copenhagen interpretation. So before observing it, uh, after you split the piece, you don't have a bigger piece or a smaller piece, but a superposition of both the pieces, and also your friend as well. Your friend also has a superposition of both the pieces. You should know that it's not that you don't know because you haven't looked at which piece you got, but it's strictly that it's not been established yet which piece you possess. You will have a superposition of both the pieces. It exists in both the states at once until you observe it. Now, the moment you observe it, it will be forced to occupy one of the states. Say you won because you got the bigger piece. So obviously, you will know that your friend got the smaller piece. So somehow, the moment you are looking at your piece, your friend's piece will also occupy the complementary state. Uh, it should both of them should be complementary because you cannot have both the bigger and smaller piece. It should be part of the original bone, right? So somehow, so long after the entanglement fragments are separated physically, they are communicating with each other. And also, there is no apparent limitation on the distance of the separation. You could just travel to another planet or another galaxy, and this could happen still. So, information is potentially traveling faster than the speed of light, which is a very clear violation of Einstein's theory of relativity. This is one of the examples of spooky action at a distance. This was one of those major things that gave Einstein sleepless nights. It bothered him a lot. He tried to develop a lot of theories to explain this. So yeah, let me point out that spooky action is a difference is a wide term used in quantum mechanics to describe a lot of bizarre phenomena. Entanglement, it's just one of them. So yeah, somehow by observing one particle, you are affecting your friend's particle as well. And also, there is no way of knowing if you have considerable distance among yourself, which one of you observed it first and forced it to occupy. It could be that it was your friend that occupied the smaller piece and then you got the bigger piece. So I see you see the problem. So this analogy was developed by this lady, Dr. Jenna Levin. She's an astrophysicist at University of Columbia and has done some great work for science communication. I guess you could look up her work. She has talked about this analogy a lot. Now, let's put it this more formally. The EPR paradox, which is the main problem with entanglement. Einstein, with his colleagues Podolsky and Rosen, developed the EPR paradox as the way of showing that quantum physics is inconsistent with laws of physics. So, putting it more nicely, we can look at this very easy version of EPR paradox. So an unstable spin zero particle decays into two different particles, particle A and particle B, heading in opposite directions. Since the initial spin was zero, due to conservation of angular momentum, the final spins must be zero too. So if particles A has spin half, the particle B must have spin minus half. But again, they don't have the spin half and minus half immediately, and until they are observed, both of them have a superposition of both the state. They do not have a definitive state. In this case, it's an equal probability of having a positive or negative spin. So why this is troubling is that quantum mechanics says that before the moment of presentation measurement, they do not have a definite quantum spin, but a superposition of both. As soon as we measure the spin of one particle, somehow the other one just knows what spin is supposed to take on. That's kind of counterintuitive. Now, as I said, this Einstein and a lot of other scientists were very bothered by this, and they developed alternate theories to solve the EPR paradox. The most important one is the hidden variables theory. Einstein claimed that quantum mechanics is, although it's consistent, it is an incomplete description of reality. It was suggested that perhaps there is some missing information that we haven't yet figured out in our understanding of entanglement. He called it the hidden variables. So if you think about it, it does make a lot of sense that the particles must have determined what state they're eventually going to occupy at the time of formation itself. But yeah, unfortunately, this theory has repeatedly been disproved through experiments in favor of the Copenhagen interpretation. Now it's very widely accepted. Copenhagen interpretation is widely accepted as the correct or more appropriate version of quantum mechanics. Now you may ask, the hidden variables theory is disproved. Disproved how? So let me point out that I do not understand this part, Bell's theorem, completely myself. I guess in a couple of years you may dive into it yourself. So Bell's inequality is what proved and solved the debate between hidden variables theory and Copenhagen interpretation. It's a very complex debate between Bohr and Einstein that lasted for decades, and this put a rest to it. So Bell's inequality are a series of probabilistic statements which give a condition if two particles are independent. So if an experiment is violating this inequality, it implies that those particles just has to be correlated. And it's been verified repeatedly that it's just physically impossible for those two particles to not be correlated. So this is one of the simpler forms of Bell's theorem. It's very easy to understand. In this Venn diagram, if there are three conditions, if you are following A but not B, B but not C, its sum should be greater than or equal to A but not C. But somehow quantum physics always defies that. You may read some of the experiments on your own. It's quite an interesting concept. So yeah, we talk so much about quantum entanglement, but let's now briefly go through how is it created. Entanglement from birth. A pair of photons produced during a decay of a heavy atom are entangled as they need to follow conservation of angular momentum. Second generation entanglement, if using two particles that are already entangled to interact with two other particles and somehow making them correlated. So, and the other two, it's sort of self-explanatory, I guess. And there are a lot of physical examples of that you can read on your own. I'll also provide some sources later. Entanglement by accident, entanglement by interaction. But yeah, I guess the underlying basic concept is same in all these. A pair of articles somehow just get correlated. Now, very important part, applications. So yeah, this quantum theory has been developing from 1930s. It took several years to bring humans to understand it that well that we could exploit it and make use of it for our own technological advancements. And let me tell you that even these are in their primitive stages. But yeah, guess what, we have come a long way. So you might have heard about quantum computing. So this is a very in a very primitive stage, and this is how a quantum computer looks typically looks now. Companies like IBM and Google are developing. This one is a photo of a quantum computing facility at Google. So they are unconventionally different from classical computers. write out how their algorithm, that how they use computation. They use superposition and entanglement. So it's not about just a problem of speed, or like in your childhood you might have seen bigger computers, desktops in your home, and now you have a computer in your pocket, but it's just a engineering problem. But quantum computers and classical computers are just different, and at their heart of how they perform the computations. Let's dive briefly into that. So quantum computers use the concept of qubits. That's a quantum bit. So classical bit, as you know, occupy two states, zeros and ones. But a qubit is capable of handling data in a much more elaborate fashion, because it can occupy any linear combination of zeros and ones because of the superposition principle. So if this is a classical bit, uh, this is how a quantum bit is. Like it can occupy any point on this surface of the sphere. If I'm not wrong, this is called a Bloch sphere. Again, quantum computing is another talk of our own. Physics Club, I guess, has had many talks on this topic, and I guess we'll have it in future as well. So it's mostly superposition that it's play here, but entanglement plays a role too. So due to entanglement, a change in any one part of the system will cause a change in the entire system. So yeah, if in a system you do some hocus pocus computation in one bit, in one part, it will change the other part as well. So it does save a lot of energy, I suppose. Then another application, cryptography. So the inherent uncertainty in quantum mechanics can be very useful to encrypt sensitive data to make it unhackable. So I guess it will be mighty difficult to steal data if in between the sender and receiver, if the data does not even exist. So algorithms are developed so that the intended receiver will observe it and before observation it does not have a definite form, as we can see, because of superposition and entanglement. So yeah, information is stored in quantum system that exists in superposition, so it is not in a definitive form. So yeah, it's mighty useful to encrypt data, and in a control we are using entanglement and superposition in a control manner to for this applications. So yeah, some recent news about quantum entanglement. In July 2019, some scientists at Glasgow University managed to observe or capture, pun intended, for this, and they have captured this photo of entanglement. So yeah, 2019 was, I guess, a great year for capturing images for science. Black hole images was observed as well. So how they did it? A team of physicists from the University of Glasgow, they devised a system to produce a stream of photons. It passed from a series of objects and performed a phase change. So they included a super sensitive camera capable of detecting single photons and capturing images. However, the catch was that the camera was only programmed to take pictures of entangled pairs. That if it sees one photon, and if it will only take a picture if it can see its entangled twin as well. So they were effectively they're visually capturing entanglement. I don't know a lot about this experiment. I'll provide you the sources and you can read on your own, I guess. Another latest development, the University of Copenhagen, we have used this term a lot today, successfully connected macro objects in quantum entanglement. So mostly when we talk about quantum physics, we talk about environments that are very cold or very small. So I guess this is a very huge step, again pun intended, by successfully entangling a millimeter-sized drum with a large cloud of atoms. This is very recent. I'll provide you all the papers. Thank you. I hope you learned something from this.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yes,
So much.
yes, thank you so much. This was so useful.
Okay, I guess we can move on to the question and answer session.
Yeah, guys, I would like to request you to unmute yourself one by one and please ask the questions. If there is no questions, I guess we can take some from the chat. So a general question that has been a source of confusion has been, how is the EPR paradox resolved? So would you like to elaborate on that, Anuja?
Yeah, so Bell's inequality is the main thing that disproves the EPR paradox. So there are a number of experiments. I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with all these details, but theorem basically says that it provides a condition if two particles need to be correlated with each other. Uh, sorry, need to be not correlated with each other, completely independent. So if they are violating, then you can say that it is somehow just they are correlated. I will give you an example. Um, so you might have heard about polarizers. So uh, I'll give you a link of the YouTube video you can watch later, which explains which gives an example of this more elegantly. But yeah, the Bell's inequality will basically it's it displays. I'm sorry, I disconnected the call by mistake. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah, so Bell's inequality basically puts a condition if two particles are independent. So a violation of these conditions proves that the initial assumptions we took must be wrong. So there are just two assumptions that they are not that they are independent, or the physical there is some problem with physical reality. So it makes sense to say that they just need to be correlated. So so yeah, that's what it is. I'm sorry, I'm not able to elaborate more on that. Uh, Even in third year physics, it's not uh, covered that well. I guess I'll be able to tell you that in a couple of years, or maybe you can tell me.
There is a yeah, Ranjan Basti wants to ask something.
Hello, Nuja
Hello?
ma'am. So, I just, the follow-up question to the EPR thing. So, EPR paradox is basically like the information can't travel faster than the speed of light. So, the two entangled, like this violates the relativity that two entangled particles are.
It is one of the
we know.
problems of the EPR paradox, but it's not the only one.
Okay, so
Continue.
Bell's inequality kind of rule out the hidden variable thing.
Yeah, Bell's inequality rules out hidden variables, and it introduces that quantum mechanics follows the property of non-locality. Like even when the particles are physically separated, they will affect each other. That's what it implies.
But how does it solve the EPR paradox? I'm still not getting it. Like the information is still faster than light.
It is not solving the EPR paradox. Bell's inequality is disproving
The variable thing.
hidden variables theory. So it's saying that the particles need to be correlated even when they are physically separated. There is no other way. So this violates locality. If because if their particles are far away and one of them is affecting the another, this is a very clear violation of locality.
So what is locality? Could you just elaborate more?
Locality is simply can some seniors elaborate on that? I'm not sure.
So locality basically is just that a particle is influenced by its immediate surroundings mostly. That's your principle of locality.
Yeah, that's easily put.
Violet, right?
Like so, Bell's inequality saying that it is not true. Like
Yeah.
for quantum particle locality can't be true, but why? Like the localities just introduce jargon for kind of coping up with the EPR paradox, as I understand it.
Sorry, can you elaborate on that?
No, I as the way I said that locality is
Yeah,
like the influence of particles. So the EPR paradox, like someone in the chat, I think said it is solved. Someone is saying it's not solved. So EPR paradox is solved or it's unsolved. What is it?
It is unsolved. So entanglement, we still don't know that how is it happening. It is still an open question. We are somehow we have applications for that. So we are somehow able to exploit that property to our advantage, but we still don't know how is that happening.
Okay. Thank you.
It's just Bell's inequality is simply just disproving hidden variables theory. It's just introducing non-locality in quantum mechanics. That's all it is.
Yeah, the hidden variables theory, I think, can be disproved by logic. I think I read I found a very clear explanation. It's on the I think 3Blue channel. The logical for that Bell's. So Bell's inequality is like
it is logical. Still, you need to take help of experiments. That I guess.
But I think they explained it from a logical standpoint. So was that incomplete? Or will the real variable thing?
Real variable thing.
So explaining the real variable thing by pure logic is like kind of there's a hidden fallacy in that argument.
Ranjan, so if you want to share this with us, we'll be happy to share it with everyone who attended the meet as well. And we can actually get back to you after we actually have seen all of this, right?
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
No, I'm not saying that. It's fine. But yeah, share. Also, we could also learn something new about it.
Okay, so I'll share the. Okay, good.
Just a second. Just a second. Amoghbhaiya wants to add something. Amoghbhaiya, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the thing is that EPR paradox was resolved by the Bell's theorem. Hello.
Yes, you can elaborate on that.
Okay, so EPR paradox was resolved by the Bell's theorem. So the thing is, how was it resolved? It seems that it violates locality, but locality is a weak condition and it arises from the condition of causality. So in hidden variable theory, if you impose the condition of causality, but it is really imposed by a theorem called no signaling theorem. And another thing is if you impose determinism and then integrate over all the hidden variables, you will recover the Bell's inequality. So in that way, it might seem to violate locality, but it does not violate causality. So it is a physical thing, like it does not violate the basic principles of physics. And that's how it resolved the EPR paradox.
Okay. Thank you for that bit of information.
Okay, thank you.
Ranjan, are you satisfied with that answer?
I actually don't know what is Bell's inequality. I saw the video. I understood the logic. So I think Bell's inequality is derived from that. So Bhaiya is saying that Bell's inequality solved the EPR paradox, but how I'm still not getting it. Sorry.
No, Bell's inequality does not solve the EPR paradox. So
So what
basically, the
solves the EPR paradox?
Bell's theorem resolves the EPR paradox. If you
Oh,
assume
sorry,
a
the
hidden,
Bell's theorem. Okay, I'll
yeah,
read upon Bell's theorem. Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Divyansh.
Yeah, I want to ask that it is said that the entanglement violates the special theory of postulate of special theory of relativity that information can't travel faster than light. So how
Yes.
can both these theories are go side by side, not even they contradict the assumption made in the other.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's actually still, if I'm not wrong, it's an open-ended thing. So this is one of the major problems that exist in physics today to combine quantum mechanics and theory of relativity. If somebody else wants to add on that, but yeah, this is one of the
yeah.
open-ended questions. No one knows about that.
Anuja, can I say something?
Sure.
Okay, so the thing is that the fact that information cannot travel then faster than the speed of light is not violated by entanglement. So there are things like super dense coding and quantum teleportation, which seem to violate this principle that information can't travel faster than the speed of light. But really, if you see the math, it does not violate because the thing is in quantum mechanics, you can only extract information from the system when you measure the system. And if you have two entangled particles, then measuring one entangled particle does not imply that you can extract information from the other particle as well. There is a lot of randomness in that thing.
No, for the entanglement particle, we say that they are all the things, basically in quantum, all the state of those particles are basically the same. So if we extract information for one, basically we have the state information about the state of other.
Yeah, so that's true, but you can extract information from the state only when you measure the state, only when you measure the system. And if you cannot come, so the thing is that entangled particles can be written in many different, the entangled states can be written in many different bases. So basis, I don't think you guys know what a basis is. So let's say that the entangled states can be written in many different types, and all these different types have different measurement operators, and there are infinite number of them. So let's say a person measures on a entangled state, and the state falls in the system falls in a certain state. So the, as you said, the other particle will fall to a corresponding state, but the other observer doesn't know that the first observer, the which operator first observer used. So unless and until the other observer doesn't know which operator this first observer used, he cannot make a precise measurement. And unless and until he cannot make a precise measurement, he cannot extract the complete information. And if you cannot extract the complete information, the principle is not violated.
But sorry, but if like I am the I have set up, I am doing the experiment. I have set up the detectors. So I've set up one detector in like in a state. So I know both the detectors, like which alignment they have. So when one particle goes through the detector, I immediately know that the other particle will go to the detector
Yes,
with the opposite spin.
but in that case, you already have the information with you. It's not like, since you know the setting of the detectors uh, before even measuring, that means that you have all the information beforehand.
So you are saying that entanglement could be seen as like a one entity thing. They are not two separate particles
No,
fundamentally.
you need two separate particles for it. You need two separate quantum systems.
But,
So it
but
doesn't
I
violate
know the
relativity,
states.
right?
No, I
Sorry.
know the states.
Yes, so
Uh,
that's what, right? If you know the states and the measurement operators beforehand, then yeah, you do not extract any information after measuring.
but still, if one particle has gone through a detector, and
Okay.
I immediately know that the regardless of the thing. Just a
So
second.
yeah, you had information about the state, right? That's what you are saying, right?
So okay, so you are saying that I had information that they are going to be opposite regardless
Yes.
of anything else due to
Yes. Yes.
entanglement. Then
Yes.
I okay, got it. Okay. So
May,
okay, I already had. Okay, cool.
means if we had already had information and so we do not extract, so no principle is violated, right, Vijay?
No, it is not violating.
Okay, Vijay.
So that's what, right? Entanglement doesn't violate the principle of causality, and or when you start measuring things, it also doesn't violate the principle of locality.
Oh, okay, Vijay.
Yes,
So
it
like
seems to.
if one data is random, the other data will be the opposite of that random. The both are
Suppose,
random.
yeah, if the parity is that way, yes, if your state is that way, the initial state.
Okay.
So read about. So the thing is, it is a bit confusing to see to talk about these things without the mathematical background actually. Like you might seem to think that this is vague and stuff, but when you see the mathematics, it will be more clear to you.
Yeah, we probably run through decades of mathematics in the whole discussion. So
Exactly. So like the EPR, after the EPR paradox paper was published, 30 years after that, Bell gave the resolution. So like, yeah, you can read the EPR paradox paper actually. The EPR paper, it is just a one-page paper. It is pretty easy read. If someone can post that, then that would be good.
yeah, we'll share it with everyone.
Guys, do we have time?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. Like we need to end by 7:30. So yeah, go ahead. Unmute.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead.
Actually, someone did mention about causality. I just wanted to ask about it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask what it does it exactly mean?
Oh, so causality simply put would mean that one thing causes another to happen, and that is the basic. It's a very philosophical thing, and yeah, that is the basic principle behind it. Like one thing causes another to happen, and
It's like one thing is dependent on another.
yeah, and
So,
yeah, that. So it's basically. Do you know what light cone is?
okay. So even in quantum mechanics, it
The light
happens.
cone is.
So yeah, as Vedant put it, causality basically means that cause precedes the effect, if there is some effect, then there is another cause for it, and it's happening before. So yeah, as Amok said, that entanglement does not violate causality. That's the basic thing about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there have been a few viewpoints of causality in throughout our history. Like earlier, we used to have in the classical picture before Einstein, we used to think that all of the cause and effects happen instantaneously. If you move a charge at one point, it causes an effect on the other charge instantaneously. But yeah, Einstein later pointed it out that it's not really true. Information also takes some time to travel. So similarly, yeah, cause and effect also has some lag, if you will. Okay, do we have any other question? Yeah, if you guys have any question, you can just unmute and ask.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Uh, it's just a basic question. I wanna just ask that how Einstein approached that speed of light is the limit of speed, like nothing can escape, like greater than speed of light. Is it just an assumption or is it a theorem?
It is a postulate of the special theory of relativity. So, in a sense, you could say it's an assumption. It's something that goes into the theory, and that theory happens to explain a lot of things uh, at a lot of levels. So, yeah, it's at this point, I think it's safe to believe that is the case. That there is a speed limit in nature. So, yeah, I'm willing to believe that is the case.
Yeah, because there are many types of limit, and I just wanna ask this: is it an assumption or a?
It's definitely an assumption. But if you are willing to accept that, then well, there is a lot of good other things that come with it, right?
Yeah, if you assume that, then only you can prove the other things that are proven by relativity.
So, Tushar, even in theory of relativity, if your any object travels faster than the speed of light, it because your synchronization of clocks works with the speed of light itself. If something travels faster than the speed of light, it claims that it's traveling in the past. So basically, the cause is coming like after effect. In that case, that is why it is something that is assumed, because no cause comes after effect, right?
Yeah. But my question was that is it an assumption or a theorem?
So it's not really a theorem, because it's not based on some principle, and we have not really claimed it as such. It's basically a principle. We take it as it is because on the basis of it we synchronize our clocks and everything else. And if we actually uh, assume that any other particle does travel faster than speed of light, then we are violating the causality principle. Right. So whatever we have based our physics, STR, and everything upon this principle, it seems violated because of if we assume otherwise. That is why we do set this as a limit and as an assumption.
How does it violate it? Can you explain? How does it violate the causality?
So if anything travels faster than the speed of light, right? So you have our synchronization of clocks in STR. Our synchronization of clocks works on the basis of your speed of light. So no information can travel faster than the speed of light. So cause comes effect. Cause comes before effect when we can only claim that as when there is a cause, and the instantaneous moment that we say there is an effect, that could only be happening when there is a gap of a speed of light there. Like if the information is passed at the speed of light, we have this using the principle. Now if we claim that there is something traveling faster than the speed of light, then the cause is not coming before effect, because this information is traveling faster than the speed of light. Therefore it could happen that it is traveling faster than time itself. All right, because we have based the concept of time and the concept of synchronization of clocks at different places, at different points in places, on the basis of speed of light. So if you say that right now, whatever, wherever you are, your clock says, let's say 7:30 p.m. and clock somewhere else says it's 7:30 p.m. as well. Now the synchronize, you do something and the effect of it happens the other place, right? Now the clocks, the time that is noted about when your cause comes and when that effect comes, that is synchronized. Those clocks are synchronized by time. So if you are doing something that is your cause is actually happening faster than the speed of time, like speed of light, what happens is that then it displays on the other clock that you are actually surpassing time. You're actually if so you did something at 7:31 p.m., it actually shows there that it happened at 7:30 because you travel faster than speed of light, and you basically travel to the past, because our synchronization of clocks is based on the light speed of light.
No, you are saying this only on the behalf on assuming that in our world that speed of light is the limit. If you already assumed that, then only you can say I am traveling back in time if I go beyond that.
Because that principle of assumption is there, right? Your information, if we assume that
Hello?
there is information that can travel faster than the speed of light, so you can't say that the clocks are synchronized at all then. How would you synchronize the clocks at different places?
Hello, can I add?
Sorry, I want to add something. The thing is that in special theory of relativity, we don't really put assumption that speed of light is the speed limit. We just assume that speed of light is same in every frame, and everything really comes out of that. You just assume that speed of light does not change based on your frame of reference.
No, speed of light
And
is the speed
and the
limit.
thing that that is we don't assume. We just assume that speed of light is same in every frame of reference. And if you just put this assumption, then you get that the speed of light is the speed limit. You get that out of the equation. You don't really put it by hand.
Ranjan, according to the theorem, m is equals to m naught upon under root 1 minus v square upon c square, or any other theorem such like that, if you exceed the speed of light, this theorem, this equation destroys. Hello.
Tushar, Ranjan, 1 minute. Ranjan, 1 minute. Divyajit, Ranjan, 1 minute. Tushar, you just answered your own question. Like that was one of the key reasons why we keep this speed limit. Because even if you want to verify that, okay, we have something which can exceed the speed of light. Now when you start considering the relativistic effects, okay, so as you just said, whenever something will exceed, even it will reach the speed of light, you will have an infinite amount of energy. Now, from where will you get this infinite amount of energy when you have something with a finite mass? So, Tushar, you have just pointed out something that answers your question. And section Chirag, if it's wrong, then please add to it.
Would Amok like to point something out on that?
Hello.
Yeah, so the thing is, there is some actually intuition, or let's say some argument behind assuming that speed of light is constant in all frames, and also assuming that implicitly it is the speed limit. It is the fact that the people who first thought about this, what the argument that they had in mind is that if anything travels faster than the speed of light, or if anything can achieve speed faster than the speed of light, then all kinds of information will travel at that speed. It won't travel at the speed of light. But we know for a fact that information travels at the speed of light. Like at that time, they knew that at least the light travels at the speed of light. So if if there was a speed more than the speed of light, then all information would have traveled at that speed. But we know for a fact that that does not happen. So, and that hasn't been proved so far. So in that way, that was a good postulate for them.
So guys, I'm really sorry, but I guess we'll have to end it here. We're already 5 minutes over time. So yeah, I hope
If you want, you can carry on this discussion in the WhatsApp. It's a very constructive discussion. We may carry.
yes, you can carry on the discussion in the discussion forums. That's really nice.
Someone could send the link of WhatsApp here.
The group, yes, we don't have that.
Oh yeah, sure. Guys, if someone can share that link.
I'll do it.
Okay. So yeah, I hope everyone got to learn something from today's talk. It was a really nice discussion. I enjoyed it. And yeah, just so that you guys know, we'll be sharing the slides and or the recording of the meeting and all the relevant things from the talk with the mail that we'll be sending in a couple of days. So yeah, do look forward to that. And yeah, I think Shashank has shared the WhatsApp chat link in the chat. So yeah, I guess that's about it for today. And I'll stop the recording now.
Really thankful for Physics Club for giving this opportunity.